Raksha is very excited to interview DA Boston as we are making the transition from Black History Month to Women's History Month. And there's nobody better to highlight than our own DeKalb County DA, Sherry Boston, who is making history in the top 1% of African American district attorneys in the whole United States. And then also, you're one of three um, African American DAs in the state of Georgia. Am I correct?
No, actually, we've grown. So I am one of, I believe we have 8 female African American district attorneys in the state of Georgia now.
Oh my goodness, because I remember reading somewhere you were one of three, and so
Yeah. So
that's amazing.
when I first came, when I first started my term on January 1st of 2017, I was the only African American district attorney in the state of Georgia. And then over time, we started gaining more. And then by the time the 2020 elections happened, we were joined by several more. And so we have now gone from just me in January of 2017 to 8 here as we are sitting here on March of 2022.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So that's exciting and so important. And thank you for all that you do. And I know you've been a great ally in addressing domestic violence in DeKalb County with your 2 signature events, right? One is the Building Bridges event that you have been doing when you started as a Solicitor General in DeKalb County, right? And then you have the race that you just did, right? Do you want to tell us more about those events?
Yeah. So our domestic violence symposium, which is every year building bridges, and then we add on, whatever our title is of the theme that year. We just had our 10th year symposium, I guess, this past.
Wow.
No, actually, maybe we're at 11. COVID is, lost track of time in COVID. And so that's an event that I started as Solicitor General, and we have just been continuing to do because people really have really gotten to the point where they expect us to put on this event and really bring a light to domestic violence in our community. And every year we try to highlight a different area of domestic violence that is, really kind of current and in the news and that kind of thing. And then, this past weekend was our 7th annual Love Run, which we hold every February, which is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And we raise money that goes directly to the Women's Resource Center to end domestic violence. And so we do a 5K, and again, just bringing together the community and people and raising money to support victims in our community. So I have been just really excited for the last, 11, 12 years as an elected official in DeKalb County to have 2 signature events that have just continue to draw a lot of attention and a lot of desire to see those events continue in our community.
Oh, and it's so wonderful to see you do that, and I'm always so proud of you. And I love being a part of the symposium every year, and for our ability to bring community together to have these important discussions, and you engage the entire community as best you can. And I love it, from faith to our immigrant communities to folks doing the work. One of the things that I know that you've been working on, kind of looking at how to make our criminal justice system more fair and just. And as we talk about race, that's such an important issue given what's been happening the past couple of years. Can you tell us a little bit, like in your role as district attorney, which I know it's got to be, as a Black woman in the criminal justice system, I know that's not an easy role to be in, given all that's happened for generations, but even the past couple of years. So I know you've been doing some work and serving on some committees, and I'd love for everybody to hear about what you've been doing and exploring.
So I have just been really in a great position to meet so many great stakeholders that are doing amazing work across the country that really allowed me the opportunity to bring back some of these ideas to DeKalb County. And one of which was getting involved with the Vera Institute and being selected as one of 3 sites across the country to be a part of their Reshaping Prosecution project, which focused on looking at racial inequities in the criminal justice system. And we applied for this grant because we know that building trust in the criminal justice system involves gaining the trust of your community.
Mhm.
And in order to gain the trust of your community, you have to acknowledge the missteps that the system has played in the decades that we've had it. And so there is no doubt that there have been and still exist to be racial inequities in the criminal justice system. Mass incarceration continues to imprison more brown and Black people than anyone else in the United States. And if we don't acknowledge that Black and brown people aren't making up the percentages in the population equivalent to the number of folks we're having that are imprisoned, then we are not seeing reality. And so a big part for me was acknowledging that the system has failed on many levels. And while I utilize this system to seek justice for victims and to hold people accountable, if we aren't trying to figure out the ways that the system has not served some people in that system, then I'm not doing my job. And so we have really tried to shine a light on the lens of the system from that perspective. And we have delved into being transparent about our data and allowing our data to be reviewed in order to determine if we have policies or practices that are promoting inequities in the system. And how do we go about taking recommendations in order to address those concerns and problems? And even though as a Black woman and leading this office, it would be short-sighted for me to think or believe that just because I am a woman of color, that those inequities wouldn't exist, or that if we were in DeKalb County, which has a large percentage of African Americans in our population, that those inequities don't exist, because they do. And so we have worked really hard to come up with ways to address those issues, some of which have started with our mandatory implicit bias training. We became the first and only office, district attorney's office in the state of Georgia, to require all of its employees to go through 8 hours of implicit bias training. And that's just not a one-off. We do it several times a year so that every person that joins our team must go through this same training. So it is important that we recognize how implicit bias can affect and does affect the way we interact, not only with defendants in the criminal justice system, but our victims and our witnesses. And that we need to make sure that we understand what our biases might be so that we can approach all of the actors in the system in a way that's without bias. So that's just one of the things that I've been really excited to work on, and we hope is making monumental difference in our approach to prosecution here in DeKalb County.
Oh, that is awesome. Are there any, I know one of our big questions was like, why is it important that we talk about race? And I feel like you've just answered that question, because there's been decades of inequity in our systems, and it's so important for us to talk about it. Are there any other things that you want the community to know that's important for folks to consider about race, especially as we talk about domestic violence?
Well, the thing about DeKalb is I have the opportunity to represent such a diverse community. We are not monolithic, and we have communities of color, of all shades of Black and brown. And then we have refugee communities and immigrant communities, folks that are coming outside the lens of the norms and cultures of the United States. And then we have, our other communities like our LGBTQ plus community that are dealing with the inequities and how people view that community as it relates to the criminal justice system and certainly domestic violence. So I think for me, when you represent so many different types of people in your community, you have to learn and you have to reach out to those communities so that they understand that you are here for them, that you are willing to understand their norms and their culture, their issues, their concerns, the problems that they face specifically,
Mhm.
so that you can address them. Like, for example, we know that our AAPI community was targeted during COVID due to, racism around the coronavirus and how it got here and who's responsible. And we saw, an uptick in Asian hate based on that. And so understanding that we had business owners and community members that were scared, that people were coming into their places of business or coming up to them on the streets and telling them to go back to their countries and that they're responsible. So, I mean, a lot of it is just really understanding where those communities are coming from and what they face, because that's not something that I faced in the Black community during COVID. But it's certainly something that the AAPI community was facing, every day, and was a really scary situation for many people.
And thank you so much for showing up and being so responsive and holding the forums that you did to show up for the AAPI community, because I know a lot of folks didn't feel as connected or felt like folks were minimizing what was happening. So again, big kudos and thanks to you for
Thank you.
always being connected to community and connecting us all, and also just, including us in a lot of conversations. That means so much. One of the last questions, and I know every time you do the forum, the Building Bridges, right, symposium, you always tell your own story. And part of what we talk about domestic violence, we talk about the folks that want to utilize the criminal justice system, and we have folks that don't utilize the criminal justice system. And I always love the story that you tell about your own family, right, of not necessarily utilizing criminal justice system, but how domestic violence played a role in your life. And I always find that powerful. Do you feel comfortable sharing that?
Sure. I don't, it's so funny because, obviously I had shared some of my history at our symposium, but it wasn't until I received the Champions for Change Award from WRC that I actually shared the story, or actually shouldn't say shared the story, that I actually was able to speak about it publicly with my mother in the room for the first time.
Oh, wow.
And it was one of those things where it's like, obviously I understood the story and the history because it was a story that had to be told to me because I was not the direct recipient of it. But for those that have been to our symposium or don't know my story, is that my grandmother um was the victim of an abusive marriage and an domestic violence relationship with my grandfather. And when she was pregnant with my mother, who was her fifth child, she had to flee in order to save her life and the life of my mother, her then unborn child. But in doing so, and this was in Virginia, my grandmother had only gone to school through the third grade. Barely could read and write, and she had to leave her four children behind because she couldn't take them with her. And she left them with her mother-in-law, who told her, "You got to go. If you don't leave, he's going to kill you." And so, it was, for me in doing this work, it was a realization that, at that time in rural Virginia, as in a lot of rural places, there wasn't a women's resource center or a Raksha or a women's shelter or a place where my grandmother could go and keep her family together. She had to flee pregnant, alone, homeless, without money, and was able, on the kindness of strangers, to become a maid, for someone that took her in and allowed her to have a baby and care for herself, in order to save her life. Um, and had she not done that, I'm not sure that I would be sitting here, because maybe my mother would have been able to be born into this world, but there's a strong possibility, as I hear the story of that last night that my grandmother spent, with my then grandfather. She slept on a log outside of the house because he wouldn't let her in the home. And that's the night that she finally decided she had to flee. And so I say that because even though I knew the story, and my grandmother had a knot on her head her entire life that I was told came from her being hit with a frying pan by him, it was still something that, like, no one ever used the word domestic violence or domestic abuse to describe it. It was just always like, he was a mean man, and he, similarly, you won't be surprised that he was not exactly kind to his children either. Um, but it was something that it always amazed me. And it wasn't until I started doing this work that I was just like, why is no one in my family really talking about that cycle of violence? And it goes back to some of the things that we know happen, especially in the Black community.
Mhm.
There was a long time where domestic violence wasn't talked about. It was you didn't talk about it. You didn't tell anybody. It was secret. It was, expected. It was, you just didn't talk about it. So for me, I was just kind of amazed, as I'm just like, why aren't we calling this what it is? And so I started telling my family story. And then when I got the award and my mom was coming for the award, I realized that we had never really talked about it. And so when I got up on the stage, and my grandmother had just actually passed away
Mm.
1 year, it was about a 1 year anniversary of her death. And I told my story in a really public way with my mom in the room. I remember looking down, and she was so tearful. And it was a realization that we'd never had that conversation to really call it what it was, and to talk about how my grandmother's strength in
Mhm.
leaving her children, to save her life, saved our entire family. It saved my mother, it saved me, and it's the reason that one of my daughters is named after, not my grandmother that was the victim, but my grandfather's mother, Lucy, who said, "Go, and I will take care of the children." So it was her intervention of recognizing the depths of what her son was capable of doing, but also saying and recognizing and loving my grandmother enough to say, "You've got to go because I know what he'll do to you, but I will take the kids." And she did. And they were raised by her. Um, and she kept them together. And as a result, my second daughter was named after her to represent what family can really be. And they were our domestic violence center. That was what we needed. And I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that. But I want every person to have that, even if it's at the hands of a stranger, and not having someone in their family that was capable of lending that level of support.
I'm almost in tears. I know I've heard the story so many times, but I don't know that I heard the part about your um, grandmother's mother-in-law, you know, telling her she had to go. This is such a powerful story, and I'm continue to be inspired by you, DA Boston, and how you show up for community. And as we're honoring Black History Month, I'm honoring you, but I'm honoring your mom, your grandmother, and your great grandmother for generations of standing up and showing up for other women, which is what we need to do every day. And that's the only way that we're going to continue to make progress in ending domestic violence. Any last words?
No, I mean, thank you so much. It is an honor to do the work that I do. And the work that I do, I say I stand on the shoulders of many. Some of those women are in my family. Some of those women are women that I've met along the way. And some of those women are the women that I continue to admire and aspire to be. So thank you.
Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, and we're so proud to work with you.